She had kept that envelope in the back of a drawer for 15 years, not hidden, not buried, just placed there. The way you place something you're not ready to face. Every single morning she walked past that drawer, made her coffee, got dressed, kissed her children, and kept moving. Because some truths, you already know what they're going to cost you before you even open them. You ever held something in your hands that you knew would change everything the second you looked at it? Not a suspicion, a knowing. That's where she was. Every day, for 15 years. Until one Tuesday morning in March. Ordinary morning. Nothing special about it. She walked to that drawer, stood there for a long moment, and something in her just shifted. She opened it, and by sundown that day, 3 families would never be the same again. This is the story of Delores Mae Carter, and what happened when the truth she'd been holding finally got too heavy to carry. Before we get to what was in that envelope, you need to understand who Delores was, because this story only makes sense if you understand the kind of woman she was, the kind of woman who carries things quietly, who holds the weight of an entire family on her back, and never once asks for help. Not because she doesn't need it, but because somewhere along the way, she learned that asking was a luxury she couldn't afford. Delores Mae Carter was 53 years old, born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, third of 5 children, daughter of a seamstress, and a man who worked double shifts at a packaging plant until his knees gave out, and his spirit followed shortly after. She grew up in a house where love was real, but money was thin. Where the heat sometimes got cut off in January, and her mother would heat water on the stove so the kids could wash up before school. Where dignity wasn't something you discussed, it was something you practiced. Every single day, without applause. She was the kind of woman you've probably known your whole life. Maybe you are that woman, the one who shows up, always. The one who remembers every birthday, cooks every holiday meal, calls to check on people who never call to check on her. The one who raised her children mostly alone after her husband Raymond left. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, the way fog disappears. One morning you just notice it's gone. She had 2 kids. Marcus, 31, living in Atlanta, working in logistics, good man, busy life. And her daughter Simone, 28, still in Memphis, close enough to drop by on a Sunday, close enough to call when something felt wrong. Delores worked 22 years as a medical records coordinator at Baptist Memorial Hospital, knew every hallway, knew the staff by name, knew which elevator was slowest, and which vending machine still took $1 bills. She was the kind of employee who trained people, who later became her supervisors. And she did it without bitterness, with grace. The kind of grace that cost something. She went to church on the first and third Sunday of every month, sang in the choir until her knees made standing too long uncomfortable. She had a small house on Lamar Avenue that she'd paid off 7 years ago, one of the proudest days of her life. A house she'd painted herself twice. A garden in the back where she grew tomatoes and collard greens and one stubborn rose bush that almost died every winter and came back every spring without fail. That rose bush meant something to her. She never said exactly what, but she tended it like it owed her something. Now, to understand why she had that envelope, why she kept it sealed for 15 years, you have to go back to the spring of 2009. Delores was 38 years old. Raymond had been gone 2 years by then. The divorce had been quiet and devastating, in the specific way that quiet things can be devastating. No screaming, no courtroom drama, just 2 people who had stopped reaching for each other and eventually stopped pretending they might. She was lonely. She won't tell you that, but she was, and that spring, at a family reunion in Tunica, her mother's side, the Beaumont family, loud and warm and full of people who cooked too much food and laughed too hard at old stories, she met a man named Ellis Beaumont. Ellis was her second cousin. Or so everyone believed. He was 42, charming in a low-key way, the kind of man who listened when you talked, really listened, Not waiting for his turn to speak, actually hearing you. He was divorced too. 2 grown kids of his own, living in Little Rock. He drove 3 hours to make it to that reunion, and he sat at the end of the picnic table closest to the sweet tea and the shade. They talked for 6 hours straight. Nothing happened between them. Not at the reunion. But something stirred. Something she didn't have a name for and didn't chase. She went home, went back to her life. Went back to being Delores. Dependable, steady, invisible in the way strong women are always a little invisible. But 3 months later, she got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Ellis, not romantic, just honest. He'd written that he'd thought about their conversation every week since the reunion, that he hadn't talked to anyone like that in years, that he didn't know what to do with that, but he didn't want to just let it disappear. She read that letter 4 times. Then she wrote him back. Over the next 8 months, Delores and Ellis exchanged 23 letters, then phone calls. Then one weekend in November, she drove to Little Rock. She stayed 4 days, and when she came home, something had shifted in her. Something quiet and warm and terrifying. She was falling. In love with a man her entire family believed was her blood relative. That was the beginning of everything. Now here is where it gets complicated, and I need you to stay with me, because this is the part where most people would make a quick judgment, would file it away in a neat little box with a label on it. But life doesn't fit in those boxes. And Delores' story certainly didn't. When she came home from Little Rock that November, she didn't tell a single soul about Ellis, not her sister Patricia, not her best friend Wanda, who she'd known since the 7th grade and told almost everything to, not her mother, who was still alive then, sharp-minded and perceptive in the way older women are when they've spent decades watching people. She kept it sealed. The way she would later keep that envelope sealed, because she already felt it. That unnamed thing sitting at the edge of what was happening between her and Ellis. That whisper that said, wait, something here isn't right. Not wrong in a moral sense, not yet, but wrong in a way that needed to be understood before it went any further. She was a medical records coordinator, remember? She understood genetics. She understood bloodlines. She understood what the word cousin meant in a small southern family, where everybody married somebody there. Grandparents knew, and she knew, that the Beaumont family tree had gaps in it, places where nobody asked questions because the answers were uncomfortable. Her mother's family was like that. Beautiful and warm and full of laughter, and full of silence in equal measure. Certain things you didn't dig up. Certain names you didn't say. Certain branches of the tree that everybody quietly agreed not to look at too hard. Ellis felt it too. The second time she went to Little Rock, February. Cold and grey, they sat at his kitchen table with coffee, and they finally said out loud what they'd been circling for months. He said, I need to know if we're actually related, she said. So do I. They ordered the DNA kits that same week. 2 separate kits mailed to 2 separate addresses. They agreed they would open the results together on a video call the day they arrived. That was the plan. But life doesn't honor plans like that. The results came on a Thursday. Ellis's arrived first. He called her immediately. She didn't answer. She was at work. A difficult day. A patient crisis, a records emergency, the kind of day that swallows you whole. She didn't see his missed call until almost 9 that night. By then something had happened. Her mother, Odessa Beaumont Carter, had called that same Thursday afternoon. Out of nowhere. No particular reason. Just one of those calls older mothers make when something in their bones is telling them to reach out. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. The garden. Marcus's new apartment. A neighbor who'd had surgery, and then, right at the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, her mother said something. She said, Baby, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. Delores went still. Her mother was quiet for a moment. And then she said, Ellis Beaumont is not your blood. He never was. His daddy, Earl Beaumont. Earl was not a Beaumont by birth. He was adopted as an infant. Nobody talked about it. You know how we do. But I always knew. And I should have said something. Delores didn't speak for a long time. Her mother filled the silence the way mothers do. I just wanted you to know. In case it ever mattered. She hung up and sat on her bed in the dark for almost an hour. Then she called Ellis back. He answered on the first ring. His voice was careful, measured, like a man holding something fragile. She told him what her mother had said. There was silence on his end. And then he said, Delores, I already have the results. She asked him what they said. He said, we are not related. Not even remotely. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. But then he said something else. Something she was not prepared for. He said, but there's something else in these results. Something that doesn't make sense. Something about your family tree that... Delores, I think you need to get your own kit. And I think you need to open it before you tell anyone else about us. She asked him why. He said, because what I'm looking at right now, if it's accurate, there are people in your family who don't know who they really are. She didn't sleep that night. She ordered her own kit the next morning. It arrived 11 days later, and then she didn't open it. She held it in her hands, sitting at her kitchen table on a quiet Saturday morning. Held it for a long time, and then she walked to that drawer in her bedroom, placed it inside and closed it. 15 years every morning. That drawer, that truth sitting there in the dark, waiting. The way truths do. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. Even if the answer only lives inside you, even if you never say it out loud, have you ever known something that you were not ready to know? Not a suspicion, not a hunch, a knowing. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. The kind that changes how you look at people at the dinner table. The kind that makes you choose that every single morning to fold it back up and put it away. Because the moment you say it out loud, you can't take it back. Delores knew that feeling. For 15 years, she lived inside it. And here's what people don't understand about that kind of silence. They think it's cowardice. They think, why didn't she just open it? Why didn't she just say something? What was she afraid of? But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what was she protecting? Because Delores wasn't protecting herself. Not primarily. She was protecting her mother. Odessa was still alive in those early years. Sharp and proud and private in the way of a woman who had survived things she never discussed. A woman who had built a life with specific, careful architecture. Every room in its place, every door where it should be. Delores looked at her mother and she understood. The way daughters sometimes understand things without being told. That whatever was in that envelope had something to do with the foundation of everything Odessa had built, and she wasn't willing to shake that foundation while her mother was standing on it. So she waited. Odessa passed in 2016, quietly, the way she had lived. Congestive heart failure, a hospital bed, 3 of her children in the room, gospel music low on a phone speaker. She went on a Sunday morning, which felt right, which felt like something she would have planned if she could. Delores held her hand at the end, and even then, even standing at that particular edge, she didn't open the envelope. Because by then there were other people to consider. Marcus had just gotten married. Simone was in the middle of a difficult pregnancy. The family needed steady ground. Delores was always steady ground, so she kept carrying it. But here's something about weight. Real weight. The kind you carry in your mind and your chest and your quiet moments. It doesn't get lighter with time. People will tell you it does. They'll say time heals. Time fades things. Time puts distance between you and what hurts. That's true for grief. It's true for heartbreak. It's even true for regret. But it is not true for a secret. A secret doesn't fade. A secret grows. It spreads roots in the dark. It gets into the walls of everything you're building. And one day you look around at your house, your careful, beautiful house, and you realize the roots have been there the whole time underneath, quiet, spreading. Delores felt this. She felt it at Christmas dinners when she looked at her brother Gerald across the table and thought, does he know who he is? She felt it at family reunions, ironic, given where this whole thing started, when cousins hugged cousins and aunts introduced children, and the whole warm, beautiful machinery of family turned and turned and turned. She felt it in the mirror, because whatever that envelope contained, and she had a strong feeling about what it contained. The way you can have a strong feeling about a thing you've thought about for 15 years. It wasn't just about other people. It was about her too, about where she came from, about which parts of herself were the parts she'd always believed them to be. Now, Alice, you're probably wondering about Alice. They stayed in contact, carefully, quietly. They were, as the DNA had confirmed, completely unrelated. No shared blood, no common ancestor for as far back as the records went. The Beaumont connection was purely social, a story that had been told so long it had become fact, the way stories do in families. They were together in their quiet way for 4 years. They never made it public, never brought it to the family. Delores couldn't figure out how to do that without the whole thing unraveling. How do you explain that you fell in love with a man everyone thought was your cousin, without also explaining why you were investigating your family tree in the first place? So they loved each other in the margins. Weekends in Little Rock, long phone calls on winter nights, birthdays remembered. A relationship that was real and warm and completely invisible to everyone who mattered. It ended in 2013, not dramatically, not badly, just the way things end when two people can't find a way to make something real. Alice met someone, a woman in his church, a woman he could bring home, a woman he didn't have to keep a secret. He told Delores in October. She sat with it for a long time. She said, I understand, and she meant it. She understood completely. What she didn't say and what she kept inside was that she'd always known this was how it would go. That the secret she was carrying had cost her more than she ever told anyone. That the envelope in that drawer hadn't just held a truth about her family, it had held a ceiling over her own life, over what she'd allowed herself to build and keep and claim. And she had chosen to live under that ceiling for years, until one Tuesday morning in March, when something shifted. There are mornings that look like every other morning. Same light coming through the same curtains. Same coffee brewing. Same sounds of the neighborhood waking up. A car pulling out of a driveway. A dog somewhere down the street. The particular quiet of early March when winter is almost done, but hasn't quite let go yet. That Tuesday was like that. Delores woke at 5:47. She knew because she looked at the clock, the way she always did. She lay there for a few minutes in the specific stillness of a woman who lives alone, not lonely but aware. Aware of the size of the quiet around her. She got up, made her coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from gray to pale blue, the way it does in Memphis in early spring. And then something happened that she would later describe to Simone as, I just got tired, not physically tired. Not the tired of a long week or a hard shift. The other kind of tired. The tired that comes from carrying something for so long that you can't remember what you felt like before you were carrying it. The tired that sneaks up on you on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing in particular has gone wrong and nothing in particular has changed, but something inside you just quietly puts down what it's been holding and says, enough. She walked to the bedroom. She opened the drawer. She stood there for a moment looking at the envelope. Still sealed, white now slightly yellowed at the edges. Her name printed on the front in that clean laboratory font. The return address of a genetics company that had since changed its name twice, been acquired once, and probably had systems that could tell you things in a week that used to take months. She picked it up, carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened it. The results were 4 pages. Dense but clear. Charts and percentages and ethnicity breakdowns, and most importantly a section titled DNA Relatives, Matches Found. She read it slowly. The way you read something when you know that the speed at which you take it in will not change what it says. The first thing she noticed was a name at the top of the relatives list, a close match. Not distant, close. The kind of match the system flagged in a different color because of its significance. The name was Diane Louise Beaumont Harris. Delores did not recognize that name. She read the relationship estimate, half-sibling. Confidence extremely high. She set the paper down. She picked up her coffee cup. It was empty. She didn't remember finishing it. She read the line again. Half-sibling, which meant one of 2 things. Either her mother had a child she never spoke about, or her father, the man she'd called Daddy her whole life, the man who worked double shifts and came home smelling like the factory and called her his best girl, was not her biological father. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, the neighborhood was fully awake now. She could hear a school bus making its rounds. Someone's lawnmower starting up, optimistic given the season. She went back to the document. Diane Louise Beaumont Harris. Age listed as 56. Location, Chicago, Illinois. The system showed that Diane had also submitted her DNA, had also been notified of the match, and this was the part that made Dolores's breath go shallow, had sent a message through the platform 3 weeks ago, sitting in Dolores's inbox, unopened, because Delores hadn't logged into the account since she created it 15 years. She found the login on an old piece of paper in the same drawer the envelope had lived in. She opened the account. The message from Diane was short. Careful in the way that messages from strangers about intimate things are always careful. It said, "Hello, I think we may be half-sisters. I've known about this match for 3 weeks, and I've been trying to find the right words. I'm not sure I've found them. My mother passed away in 2019. Before she died, she told me that I had a sister she'd never been able to find. She gave me a name. The name she gave me was Delores. I don't know if this is real, or if I'm getting my hopes up over a database. But if you're willing to talk, I'm here. Diane." Delores read the message 4 times, then she closed the laptop, stood up, walked to the back door, stepped outside into the cold March morning in her robe and her house shoes, and she stood in her garden next to that stubborn rosebush that died every winter and came back every spring. She stood there for a long time, half-sister, a woman in Chicago who had been carrying her name for years, a mother who had kept a secret until her deathbed. And somewhere underneath, all of it, underneath the half-sibling match and the woman named Diane and the message sitting in an inbox for 3 weeks, a question about her father, about who he really was, about which parts of the story she'd been living were actually true. She thought about her brother Gerald. She thought about Marcus and Simone, her children, who had a grandfather they'd been told stories about their whole lives. She thought about Diane in Chicago, 56 years old, sitting somewhere waiting for a response from a stranger who was maybe not a stranger at all. And she went back, inside, and she wrote back. The first conversation between Delores and Diane lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Delores knew this because she checked her phone afterward, the way you check the time after something that felt both very long and very short, the way certain conversations exist outside of ordinary time, because what's being said inside them is too large for regular minutes. Diane Harris was a retired schoolteacher, 56 years old, lived in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, widowed 6 years ago, 3 adult children, a voice that was warm and measured and careful, the voice of a woman who had also spent a long time carrying something and had learned to hold it steadily. She told Delores what she knew. Her mother, Ruby Beaumont, had been 19 years old in 1967 when she became pregnant. The father was a man named James Carter, a name that landed in Dolores's chest like a stone dropping into still water. James Carter. Her father's name was James Carter. Delores said nothing for a moment. Just breathed, Diane continued gently, the way you continue when you can feel someone on the other end of a line needing a moment. Ruby and James had known each other briefly. A summer. The kind of summer that happens when you're young and the world feels large and consequence feels far away. When Ruby discovered she was pregnant, James had already moved on. Already met the woman he would eventually marry. A woman named Odessa, Dolores's mother. Ruby never told James about the pregnancy. She raised Diane alone with help from her own mother, and she carried the secret the way women of that generation carried things, silently, completely, with a particular kind of dignity that looked from the outside like it cost nothing, and from the inside cost everything. She told Diane the truth on her deathbed. In a hospital room in Chicago in the winter of 2019, Diane was holding her hand the same way. Delores had held Odessa's hand 3 years. Earlier, dying women telling their daughters the things they should have said. Out loud decades ago, Delores thought about that. About how many secrets travel that same road. How many truths wait for the last possible moment, when there's no longer anything to protect, when the weight finally becomes heavier than the fear. She asked Diane, "Did Ruby know about me?" Diane was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Yes." She knew James had other children. She followed his life from a distance, the way people do when they've let something go but haven't fully released it. She knew about Delores, knew her name, knew she lived in Memphis. She never reached out. Delores asked why. Diane said she was ashamed, not of you, of the silence. By the time she thought about reaching out, so many years had passed that she didn't know how to cross that distance without destroying everything on both sides. Delores understood that completely. She understood it in her bones. Now here is where the third family enters, because while Delores and Diane were finding each other, the DNA platform was doing what DNA platforms do. Quietly, algorithmically, without drama or consideration for timing, and it was matching. Marcus, Dolores's son, 31 years old in Atlanta, had submitted his own DNA 2 years prior. One of those casual decisions young people make, curious about ancestry, about ethnicity percentages, about where they come from in the broad historical sense. He hadn't thought much about the relatives list, hadn't really explored it, but the platform had been updating, and now sitting in his matches was a woman named Diane Harris, listed as first cousin once removed or half-aunt, and a cluster of Chicago-based matches he'd never seen before. He called his mother on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after her conversation with Diane. He said, "Mama, I've been looking at my DNA results. There are people in there I don't recognize. A whole group from Chicago. You know anything about that?" There was a silence on the line, and Delores, who had spent 15 years protecting everyone from a truth she'd been holding in a drawer, looked out her kitchen window at that stubborn rose bush, and she made a decision. She said, "Baby, come home this weekend. Bring Simone if she can make it. I need to tell you both something." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is everything okay?" She said, "Everything is true." That's different from okay, but it's something. He didn't fully understand that yet. He would. That Saturday, her children sat at her kitchen table, Marcus in from Atlanta, Simone with her youngest on her hip, and Delores put the DNA results on the table between them. The envelope, finally empty after 15 years, the printed pages. The message from Diane. She told them everything. She started at the beginning. The reunion in Tunica, Ellis, the DNA kits, her mother's phone call, the drawer, the 15 years, the Tuesday morning when she finally opened it. Diane in Chicago, Ruby's secret. Their grandfather, the man in the photographs on the wall, the man they'd heard stories about their whole lives, and a daughter he never knew he had. She talked for a long time. Her children listened. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Simone was the first to speak. She looked at the photograph of James Carter on the wall, her grandfather, the man who died before she was born, and she said, "So we have an aunt." Not a question. A statement. Delores nodded. Simone looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his mother. Something moved across his face. Not anger, not shock exactly. Something more complicated. The particular expression of a person recalibrating. Taking something they thought they knew and measuring it against something new. Then he said, "Does she know about us?" Delores said, "She's been waiting." Marcus nodded slowly. Looked at the pages on the table. Looked at his mother. And then he said the thing that Delores would carry with her for the rest of her life. The thing she would tell Diane about later. The thing that would make Diane cry quietly on the other end of the phone. He said, "Then I think we should call her. Before I tell you what happened on that call, if you've made it this far with me, I want to stop for just a second, because that means something. It means you're the kind of person who stays, who doesn't skip to the end, who understands that the middle of a story, the quiet, complicated, human middle, is where the real thing lives. If this story has been sitting with you the way I think it has, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Hit that button, because every week we come back here with stories like this one. Stories about real people, real weight, real moments where somebody had to choose between what was easy and what was true. You belong here, and I'd love to keep telling you these stories. Now for those of you who've been carrying something of your own, and I think some of you have, maybe it's not a DNA envelope. Maybe it's a conversation you've been postponing, a truth you've been folding back up every morning and putting in a drawer, a name you don't say out loud, a branch of your own tree you've agreed quietly not to look at too hard. You know what I mean. You felt it when I said it. The call. Marcus made it that same Saturday evening. Simone sat beside him. Delores across the table, her hands folded still. The way she got still when things were important. He dialed the number Diane had included in her message. It rang 3 times, then a voice, warm, careful. The same voice Delores had spoken to for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Earlier that week, Diane said, "Hello?" Marcus said, "Hi, my name is Marcus Carter. I think you might be my aunt." There was a sound on the other end of the line, not words, just a sound. The kind that comes from a place deeper than speech. The kind that 15 years of waiting, and then 3 weeks of a message sitting unanswered in an inbox. And then a phone ringing on a Saturday evening. The kind that all of that produces when it finally releases. Diane said, "Oh my God," and then she laughed. And then she cried, and then she laughed again. And Simone, who had been holding herself together very carefully, put her hand over her mouth, and Delores looked at the empty envelope on the table. 15 years. She thought about all the Christmases, all the family dinners, all the reunions where she'd looked around at these people she loved and held this knowledge inside her chest like a stone. She thought about her mother Odessa, who had never known about Ruby, never known that James had left something behind before he found his way to her. She thought about James himself, dead since 1987, never knowing he had a daughter in Chicago who grew up to teach 3rd grade and raise 3 children, and sit by her own mother's bed at the end and receive a truth that was already decades old. She thought about all the ways a secret travels through time, how it doesn't stay where you put it, how it moves through bloodlines and DNA databases and casual ancestry kits ordered on a Tuesday night by a curious 30-year-old in Atlanta. How the truth, it turns out, is patient. It will wait 15 years in a drawer if it has to. It will wait longer, but it does not disappear. Over the next hour, Marcus and Diane talked. Really talked. She told him about her children. his cousins he'd never known existed. He told her about his work, his life in Atlanta, the way his mother had raised him and Simone after their father left. Simone took the phone for a while, and her voice was softer than Delores had heard it in years. The voice of a woman finding something she didn't know she was missing. At one point, Diane asked to speak to Delores. She came to the phone. "Sat down," Diane said. "I want you to know something. I'm not angry. I thought I might be. About the 15 years, about the silence. But sitting here right now, listening to your children, listening to the way they talk, the way they love each other, I'm not angry. I'm grateful," Delores said. "Grateful for what?" Diane said, "That you opened it. That you finally opened it." Delores looked at the rose bush through the kitchen window. Dark outside now, but she knew it was there. She said, "I should have done it sooner." Diane said, "You did it when you could. That's enough." And that right there is the thing about truth. It doesn't ask you to have been braver than you were. It doesn't punish you for the years you needed to get ready. It just asks that you eventually open the drawer, that you eventually make the call, that you eventually sit your children down at the kitchen table and say, "This is what I know. This is what I held. This is what I should have said out loud." 3 families, the Carters in Memphis, the children Delores raised, and the house she paid off, and the choir she sang in, and the rose bush she tended, the Harrises in Chicago. Diane and her children and her late husband, and the mother who told the truth. At the very last possible moment, and somewhere in the middle, in the space that a DNA test and a sealed envelope and one ordinary Tuesday morning in March created, something new, something that didn't have a name yet, something that was just beginning. 6 months after that Saturday evening phone call, Delores drove to Chicago. She didn't fly. She drove. 12 hours from Memphis, through Kentucky, through Indiana, the flat middle of the country opening up around her. She drove alone, which is how she preferred to do things that mattered, with the radio low and the window cracked, and the road giving her time to think. She pulled up to a house on the south side just after 7 in the evening, a modest house, a well-kept yard, flowers along the front walk that somebody had planted with care. Diane was standing on the porch. They recognized each other immediately, not from photographs, though they'd exchanged those, from something else, something in the jaw, something in the way they both stood, weight evenly distributed, shoulders quiet, the particular stillness of women who had learned to hold things without showing it. They hugged for a long time on that porch, no words right away, just 2 women, standing in the early evening light of a Chicago summer, holding what 15 years of silence had kept apart. Diane's children were inside. A dinner had been made. The table was set for people who were technically strangers, and somehow completely not. They sat down together, and they ate. Now, I've been thinking about what I want to leave you with, because this story isn't really about DNA. It isn't really about family secrets or half-siblings or the particular mechanics of what a genetics database can reveal when you log back into an account you haven't touched in 15 years. It's about something quieter than all of that. It's about the drawer. Every single one of us has one. Maybe yours doesn't hold an envelope. Maybe it holds an apology you never made, a phone number you saved but never dialed, a version of yourself you set aside because the timing wasn't right, and then the timing was never right, and then so many years passed that you almost forgot what you'd put in there. Maybe it holds a truth about who you come from, about who your people really were, behind the stories that got told at Sunday dinners and family reunions, about which parts of the history you inherited were real, and which parts were beautiful and necessary. Fictions. Maybe it holds a relationship you let go quiet because making it real would have required you to rearrange too many other things, required you to say out loud, "This matters to me. This person matters to me," even when I couldn't figure out how to have them. Delores waited 15 years, and here's what I know about that: she wasn't wrong to wait. She was human. She was protecting people she loved with the tools she had at the time. She was doing what women like her have always done, absorbing the weight so that everyone else could stand on steady ground. But she was also paying a price. The ceiling she lived under. Ellis. 4 years of something. Real lived entirely in the margins. A half-sister in Chicago spending decades wondering. Children who deserved to know where they came from. A truth that grew roots in the dark, while she kept the drawer closed and the coffee brewing and the face forward. The price of a sealed envelope is not paid all at once. It's paid in installments, quietly, over years. In the things you don't allow yourself. In the connections that don't get made. In the mornings you walk past the drawer and choose again to keep moving. Delores opened hers, not because she suddenly became brave. Not because something dramatic happened. Not because the universe sent her a sign in the sky. She opened it because she got tired. And sometimes that's exactly enough. Sometimes tired is the most honest thing you can be. Tired of performing a version of your life that has a whole room boarded up in it. Tired of knowing what you know and living like you don't. Tired of protecting everyone else from a truth that was always going to come out. Because truths do that. They come out. Through databases and deathbed confessions and 30-year-old sons who order ancestry kits on a curious Tuesday night. The truth doesn't need your permission, but the healing does. That's the part only you can open. Diane has a photograph on her mantle now. Her mother Ruby as a young woman in 1967. And next to it, one that Delores sent her. James Carter, young before the factory and the double shifts, and the family he built in Memphis. 2 young people from a summer that nobody talked about for 50 years. Diane looks at it sometimes. She says it doesn't make her sad anymore. It makes her feel like she was always supposed to be here. Delores calls her every Sunday, not the first and third. Every Sunday, because some things, once you finally let them in, you don't put back in the drawer. You keep them out where you can see them, where they can breathe. If this story sat with you today, if something in it touched a place you recognize, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me what moved you. Tell me what you're still thinking about. Or tell me what story you want to hear next. What topic? What kind of truth you want us to sit with together.